We all search for that spark which fuels our desire to fully engage in our lives. We look for the courage to experience moments where we can come alive instead of watching life pass us by. You're listening to the Front Row Factor, leaving fear and insecurity behind by exploring stories of top performers that are living life in the front row. Get ready to stand up, step up, and live it up with your host, Jon Vroman.
What's up, everybody? Jon Vroman. Welcome to the Front Row Factor podcast. And as you know, on this show, we talk to amazing people living life in the front row, fully engaged. Our guest today is Larry Hagner, a gentleman who fits that category perfectly. He is the host of the Good Dad Project podcast, author of The Dad's Edge. And by the way, his podcast hit #1 in iTunes New and Noteworthy, and his book hit #1 on Amazon in his category. I will tell you, this guy is awesome. And when I first saw his projects, I was immediately drawn because I want to be a better dad. And this guy, as a father of 3, brings experience and interviews and all sorts of great strategies to the table. On this show, we get the story from Larry about growing up in essentially what was a fatherless environment, some of his early struggles being a dad of 3, and how in one of his lowest moments in life, he had a breakthrough that would ultimately lead to us talking on the phone today. Some of the questions that I asked Larry, pretty interesting. How do we help kids to know that they are enough? And what 2 experiences should every kid have? We talk about this and so much more. And we dig into some of the strategies that he would suggest, like how to make time for quality connections when you're a busy dad doing so many different things. This interview is really fun. It's about 60 minutes. Kick back, enjoy, grab your pen and notepad because you're going to definitely get some actionable ideas here today on how to be an awesome dad. And I'll also say this, if you're listening and you haven't checked out yet because you're a mom or you don't have kids, I would tell you this podcast is great for anybody. These are timeless principles that if you just are interested in connecting with people or making a difference in the world, these are strategies that apply in almost any environment. But I will tell you that if you're a dad, you're also in the perfect place. This conversation is for you. Enjoy my time with Larry Hagner. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with Larry Hagner. Larry, welcome to the show, buddy.
What's up, Jon? How you doing, man?
I'm really great. I was just sharing with you kind of in our pre-episode conversation that I'm a little sore, had a little bit of a jog yesterday and one a little bit longer than I'm used to. But man, I'm so pumped about our conversation. Nothing was going to keep me in bed this morning. So I'm pumped to have you, man. Thanks for making the time.
You are a bigger man than me. I don't even know how. 45 miles running in one day. I think I've ran 45 miles in the past 9 years. So the fact that you did that in one day, holy cow. I don't even know how you're talking right now.
It's I'm on my 3rd cup of coffee. Does that helps? Yeah.
I bet.
So, Larry, for those of our listeners who don't know who you are yet, dude, I'm so excited to introduce you to everybody. You are host of the Good Dad Project podcast. You are author of The Dad's Edge and so much more. And I was immediately drawn to your world and your projects because I want to be a good dad. And who you are from the minute we started talking on the phone the very first time, I was immediately drawn to your authenticity and your passion and the good that you're bringing to the world. So I know we're going to get into all that, but let's go back a little bit if we can for just a minute. Can you, for my benefit and the benefit of our community, I've never asked you this question, but I'd love to know kind of your 2-minute life story. So go back to the very beginning of time and how did we end up here with the Good Dad Project and the Dad's Edge? I know it's hard to fit into 2 minutes, brother, so good luck.
You know, I've had lots of practice doing this in about 2 minutes, so I can actually give you the rundown in about 2 minutes. So
I like it.
Here's how it really happened. So the Good Dad Project, I think, was really incubating in me, ever since my childhood. And what I mean by that is, I pretty much grew up in 2 different ways, either a fatherless environment or when I did have a father figure around, it actually wasn't necessarily a very positive one. And I don't share this stuff out of pity or anything like that. I regret nothing in my childhood whatsoever. It simply was it was some good hard lessons of perhaps what not to do, right? I mean, so my mom was married about 4 times. I actually didn't even meet my biological father until I was 30, so 10 years ago.
Wow.
So really, I kind of had this upbringing of, okay, I know I don't want to be, an absent father. I know that for sure because that was horrible. And then if I'm going to be a present father, I'm definitely going to be a positive, factor in my kid's life. I'm not going to do anything, or I'm going to try not to do anything horrible or negative or anything like that. So I knew all these things of what not to do, but the problem is that I didn't know what to do. So I was kind of like stuck in this limbo of like, okay, I know I don't want to do these things, but I really want to get over here to this level, but I need a map. I need a way to do that. And then 5 years ago, my fatherhood journey was very frustrating in the beginning. I had very little patience. I had very little work-life balance. My marriage really started to suffer as well. So it was no doubt, it was challenging for the first 5 years. I've been a dad now for almost 10 years, and half of it was spent just literally frustrated and defeated. And what I did was I just went out and educated myself on how do I be better at this? How do I get out of my own way? So anything that had anything to do with self-improvement whatsoever, man, I was into it. I mean, I kind of geek out over that stuff anyway. But if there was a book on it, if there was a seminar on it, if there was a podcast on it, I mean, I was in it. So what I found is the strategies of becoming a better person, a better man, a lot of those you can literally see through and implement through the lens of fatherhood. And those strategies, like literally, they will help you become, number one, a better man. They will also help you become a better father. But selfishly, it will help you as a father. It helped me, and it's helped several other men just enjoy it. Like literally just get out of your own way and just enjoy it, which is so cool. Once you get to that level, now, I'm not saying that I never have a bad day because that is completely dishonest, but I can tell you that my life is completely different now from what it was just a few years ago.
Yeah, that's just it's an inspiring story because so many of us, Larry, can relate to the struggle, many of the struggles that you just shared, and the fact that you found a positive outlet here and you found a way to not only help yourself but help so many others along the way. Tell us a little bit about the let's start with the podcast. I told you this when we chatted on the phone, but I think so many of our listeners in the community could relate to seeing a product or service or something that somebody else has done where you think that's exactly what I've been talking about wanting to do, and you just did it. So tell us about the podcast a little bit. How did this get started, and what's the show all about?
Oh, the podcast has just been amazing. So our podcast has been around we just launched our 33rd episode. So we've been around for about 6 months. We do a weekly show. We launch every Monday morning that way, actually every Sunday night that way. On everyone's Monday morning commute, they have this podcast that they can dial into. The thing that we've really learned about our listeners is that a lot of our information, a lot of our podcasts is listened to on the to and from trip from work. So we figured, hey, Monday is the perfect day to launch this podcast. It's the beginning of the week. These guys want it at that particular point in time. It just starts out everybody's week. And that's the feedback we've gotten. That's like, man, this is like Monday morning motivation for me. Like it's the first thing I tune into on Monday morning on my way to work or whatever it is. So that's one of the reasons we launched on Monday mornings. But the podcast has really been awesome because it's been like an education. I mean, just an incredible education. Our guests have just been absolutely amazing. We've had some incredible guests on the show. We've talked about topics on the show that all of us men like literally think about all the time, but we hardly ever share it. And when I say the things that we share, I'm not talking about necessarily the sensitive, like touchy-feely stuff. I'm talking about just some of the things that we as men want to be better at, but we may not say it out loud to another man or even our spouse. But it's those things, those pain points or those struggles, or even those things we want to be better at. Those are the things we really talk about on the Good Dad Project podcast. But it's been really successful. It ranked number one in new and notable for the last 5 weeks. We were in the new and notable category.
Nice.
I know. So
that's awesome.
It was great. And then we have over 100 5-star reviews on the podcast now just in 6 months and thousands of downloads. So lots of followers. It's just been awesome.
And, I think what's great about it, Larry, is that it's one of those topics where I think this is so important. And why are there not so many other great resources just, in my face about this subject? But when it pops up, you're like, that's the podcast I probably need more than anything. As I've said this to you before, I believe I'm a father first and everything else second. And I think sometimes I would challenge dads listening to this, like, look at your desktop on your computer and you got all these folders for all these projects, but how many times do we have a folder for our children? We make a business plan, but how many plans do we make for our kids? We intensely schedule other activities for other people in our lives, but this becomes one that should have a top ranking priority for us. I mean, this is really why we're here as dads, is to nurture our children and to help them to become, as I think you say, the best version of themselves. So I just love what you're doing, man, and I thank you for your work to the world. We're going to get into some of the stuff here that you've learned from your guests and advice. So if you're a dad and you're listening, just hang in for a couple more minutes. We're gonna pick Larry's brain and get to the heart of the stuff here. Let's talk about the book a little bit for a second. So this is pretty exciting, man. The Dad's Edge: 9 Simple Ways to Have Unlimited Patience, Improved Relationships, and Positive Lasting Memories. What an awesome title. So I'm going to get back to that in a second, but can you kind of brag on the book give us the 60-second brag of the book? Tell us what's going on and how that's been for you.
Oh man, the book, so we launched it was the beginning of October. And if you would have, and right now it's, a couple weeks before, or it's the week before Thanksgiving. I mean, if you would have told me 6 weeks ago that the book would become an Amazon #1 bestseller in my categories, I would have told you were crazy, because like literally my goal for the book was just, I was like, I hope it maybe, gets in the top couple thousand, or whatever it is. But it has hit #1 in every single category that we put it in. And even the fatherhood category, which those are like the big authors. I mean, the big authors. And to hit #1 in that category was just so surreal. I mean, even as we speak right now, I just checked last night, in the fatherhood category overall, it ranked 6th in the top rated book for fatherhood. So I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, it was just so cool. I mean, here's the thing, right? I wrote that book. I'm very transparent in the book. I'm no dad expert. I'm no, guru when it comes to fatherhood. Ask my wife. She will tell you I make 100 mistakes a day. But here's the thing. I really wanted a book when I was trying to figure out this whole dad thing. I really wanted a book that maybe spoke to me and not above me, because a lot of the books and a lot of the resources that I found on, like, let's just say parenting, I felt like a lot of those books kind of talk down to you of like, these are the things you should do. And here's the situation that you're presented with. And here's how you react in that certain situation. I didn't really want that. What I really wanted was a book on how do I be a better father and a better person all in one? Because if you get to the heart of my book, it literally isn't much about parenting, believe it or not. It is, but it isn't. I don't give, advice on how to discipline your kids or behavior issues or anything like that. The advice that I give in the book are these 9 strategies, these 9 types of pain points that you're either going through as a father, several of them at one time, or at least one at a time, but you definitely hit all 9 at some point in your fatherhood journey.
That's really cool. Normally, Larry, I'd begin kind of our podcast interview by talking about, the guest's back row to front row moment. And by the way, for all I know, that moment for you may tie in here perfectly. But I feel like I want to continue the momentum that we have here and just talk a little bit about the book. Maybe I think for our listeners, let's just give them a couple of the nuggets right away. Could you just share 3 tips from the book? Maybe your 3 favorite, or 3 that would be directly impactful for our community right away. If they were to take these 3 ideas and put them into play, what would you tell them?
So the biggest question I get on the book all the time is like, wow, 9 strategies to unlimited patience. Like, that's the #1 thing, right? I put it first there for a reason, because I will tell you now, for doing this now for 3 years, where blogging, podcasting, now the book, doing speaking events. I do speaking events for men as well. I do coaching as well. And I can tell you the number one thing that I hear every single time I talk to a father is, I want more patience. I want more patience. I don't want to be frustrated. I don't want to feel defeated. All those things are so intertwined with our patience. If you look at frustration, it has a lot to do with patience. If you look at feeling defeated, it has a lot to do with your patience. If you look at being stressed out, it has a lot to do with your patience. So how do you manage that? The first thing I go over in the book is first you got to understand the whole animal of patience. And I'm not talking about from a psychological standpoint where you really get in the weeds. How do you just really simplify this whole thing? Like what can wear and tear on your patience? There are two things that will wear and tear on your patience. You have external factors that wear and tear on your patience, and you have internal factors that wear and tear on your patience. What I mean by that is external is anything that's going on outside of your mind. So like, for instance, your emails, your deadlines, the demands of your boss, the behavior issues with your kids, maybe a strained relationship with your wife, those things that can tend to stress us out, that can burn us out, that we may or may not have control over. Maybe we do have a little bit of control over, but maybe we don't. It's still in question, but it's happening outside of our mind. The internal factors are our response to those stressors. So like, for instance, it's that I call it that voice. And in the book, I refer to it as the voice of stress and fear, which is the voice of, if you're having problems at work or if you're having a strained relationship with your wife, it's that voice of saying, what's wrong with you? You should be better than this. You should be stronger than this. You must not be a good father because you can't handle this. It's all those things that we say to ourselves quietly, but the volume is so loud in our minds. And it's like literally this double-edged sword of frustration. So we've got these things that are really hindering us on the outside, but then we've got this voice that just is not doing us any justice on the inside. So how do we take control of that? And how do we make that better? And here's what you have to do. When you feel those questions creeping up of why can't I? You should be this, or why can't you do this? That is a weak-minded question. It really is. One of the things you have to do is a lot of times we simply default to that. That's been kind of our wiring of we just default to a weak-minded question. Now, what you can do is learn to ask yourself better questions. And what I mean by that is if you've ever heard the quote, the quality of our life is often dependent on the quality of the questions we're asking ourselves. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite, yeah.
I mean, I love that quote because it's absolutely true and it hits home in a big way when it comes to patience. So if you ever hear that voice, that's kind of yammering away at you, like for instance, let's just take an issue at work, where you have a presentation that you have to do in front of your boss and all your colleagues and all this, and you're like, oh man, like I hope this goes well. What if I don't perform? What if what I'm saying isn't impactful? Instead of doing that, you have to say, what am I going to do to make this presentation freaking amazing? And what am I going to say? And how am I going to say it that's just going to blow the doors off of everyone in my audience? So it's that mindset. And it, even as I ask those questions, I mean, you give me some feedback. The question that I asked in the beginning of why can't, or, what's going to happen if I don't do this presentation well, or, what if it's not impactful? And then I switch gears and I ask those other questions. What did you feel on the other side of the mic just when I asked it that way?
Pensive. Yeah, thoughtful.
Yeah. So it's more purposeful, right?
Yeah.
So it's something that you can literally kind of trick your mind into, okay, I'm not going to ask myself a defeated mindset question. I'm going to ask something that's going to point me in the direction of a good answer. Because if you think about it, our brains are wired to go find us answers. So if you ask yourself a question of, why can't I do this right? Your mind is going to go fetch that answer and tell you exactly why you can't do it right.
Yeah.
But if you ask it a different question, it's going to go fetch that answer of what am I going to do to make this awesome? And it'll go fetch that answer for you. So that's one way.
Larry, I want to actually make a comment on that too, because I think it's such a brilliant point. One of my favorite stories I like to share is I have a friend who worked for a big sales company, and he was the national sales manager, and he sat at this meeting and the president walked in and he laid down $100 Starbucks gift card and he said, "This is not going to be a prize for the best idea today. This is going to be a prize for the person who asks the best question today."
Yeah.
And he was making the point that the question is even infinitely more important than just the answer. But what question are we asking? So I love this idea. I love being really purposeful. And I love even asking that question to myself and to others is, what question are we trying to answer here? And is that positive? So good stuff. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. The only other suggestion that I can talk about, I mean, just being sensitive to time, is when it comes to patience, is being proactive in your mindset. And what I mean by that is, if you ask most men, what is the toughest time of your day? Usually I'll get two answers. One is the morning, because they'll say, well, I'm not a morning person. I need time to wake up. The other one is the 5 minutes before they walk in their door on the way home. And what I mean by that is, most men have a really hard time making that shift between,
yes,
how do I get out of work mode and into family mode? And if you look at patience, that is something that can wear and tear on your patience, something fierce, because you can be successful all day long at work, but if you don't feel successful at home, you feel like a failure. So how are you going to do that? And how I teach men how to do this, it's very, very simple. It's common sense. This is another quote I heard. It's common sense, but it's not common practice.
Yes.
I'll say that one more time. It's common sense, but it's not common practice. What I mean by that is, if you take our mentalities at work, we are always on our A game. If we're doing a presentation, if we're doing something, we are on our A game. We are trying to just bring it, right? The problem is that when we usually get home, we don't necessarily know how to bring that same A game to the home front, because usually our perspective is that, well, I'm home now, so this is kind of my sanctuary. This is where I decompress, and this is where I kind of disconnect, the world problems, my work problems, and I just kind of disconnect. It's what that mentality will do is, that mentality will literally just, it kind of is as a self-festering. It's really tough on a man to come home and have that mentality, because deep down, we don't want that. We want to engage with our kids. We want to connect with our kids. We want to make positive, lasting memory with our kids. But the problem is we don't necessarily know how. What I usually teach men to do is, you have to be proactive with your mindset before you walk in the door. So if you have anywhere from a 10-minute commute to an hour commute back home, what are you going to do within that time to get your mind right to bring that same A game back home? So, like, for instance, if you've had a really frustrating, defeated day and you don't want to bring that animosity and that tension home, one of the things you can do is put on a positive podcast, put on a positive audiobook, put on something positive that's going to help you from the outside in to get your mind in a different spot, so you can visualize what you're going to do when you get home. Does that make sense so far?
Totally. 100%. Yeah. Controlling your environment, no doubt, to control your mindset. I totally get it.
Yeah, you have to do it.
Larry, let me ask you, before we go on to the second idea, I want to go back to this question topic and the questions that we ask ourselves and the quality of the questions. Can I interject two more questions for you here?
Please.
On the theme of questions? What question do you think every father should be asking himself more than any other question?
How can I be 100% engaged right now in this moment?
Nice. I like it. We're going to have to put that one in the show notes. That's a good one. I'm going to write that and hang that on my wall today. All right. Second question is, what question should dads be asking their kids most often?
Oh, that's a great question. In part of my book, I go over, 3 ways to connect with your kids, no matter what age they are. And it's the quality of those questions again. So our default, how old are your kids again?
6 and 1.
Okay, so you have a first grader, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so when your first grader comes home from school, what do you ask them?
How was your day?
How was your day? That's what we all ask, right? How was your day? And we default to that question all the time because it's probably what we were asked. And it's just an easy question. And it's just, it's like picking up the phone and saying hello, right? Just as you have to be proactive in your mindset to bring your A game and bring that energy that you want to see in the evenings when you come home from a tough day at work, you have to prep the same way when you have those questions with your kids. Like, for instance, I love the question of, what are 3 of the funniest things that happened to you today? why were they funny? What happened today? Or what's one thing that you are truly grateful for today? And why are you grateful for that thing? Or tell me something that really challenged you today or made you really sad today, or something that really kind of made you angry today. What was it and why? Those types of questions open up an entire different dialogue than how was your day at school?
That's brilliant. I have a friend, Trent, who at dinner, he says, what's your peach and what's your pit? And he's looking for the high and the low of the day. And he calls it the peach and the pit. It's really cool. That's awesome, man. Great questions. Those are really, really positive. All right, so let's dig into, so we got one strategy from the book. Can you give us another one?
Sure. I mean, so another strategy that most men want to talk about, or actually I should say they don't really want to talk about it, but they want to know about it, is when we have kids, right? And especially if we have more than one kid, which most of us do, the one thing that can become strained in our lives, and that could be another form of stress and could be another form of a factor that's wearing on our patience, is the relationship with our spouse. So, if you take some of the toughest times of any marriage, it's usually when we have maybe smaller kids or even teenagers, and those are the times that we sort of neglect that relationship more so than others. Like when we're newlyweds, I mean, we're all about it, right? We're all in. And when we have kids, one kid, it's like, we're still all in and things are usually great. When we have 2 and 3 kids, now it gets pretty crazy, right? Because from an obligation standpoint, from a time standpoint, and even from an energy standpoint, things can get a little bit more complex, right? And one of the things that we do as men is we put a lot of energy into our work and we put a lot of energy into our kids. And sometimes we, both man and wife, I mean, whether you're male or female, it'll happen. We can tend to put those relationships on the back burner. So one of the things I go over in my book is just 3 easy ways to keep that connection alive.
And so, all right, we're hooked.
What are they, right?
Yeah, tell us. We're in. Yeah, hold on. Let me get my wife on the phone here. Hold on. Yeah, or maybe she shouldn't be. All right.
Yeah.
All right, I'm ready.
You could just surprise her with this.
She's going to be so fired up about this interview, Larry. She is so grateful for you right now. You don't even know it.
Yeah, I bet, right? No, so what you can do, I mean, again, we as men, we want things very simple. So have a daily connection. That's one. Have a monthly connection. And one more connection while you're connecting. I'll go over that. So let's talk about the daily. I call this the sacred daily 10 minutes per day of connection. So, if you have more than one child, I mean, I have no doubt. So John, I mean, you're not going to have a good conversation with your wife over dinner, right? I mean, because it's all about it's all about the kids, right? So, you're not going to have that connection over dinner. And a lot of times the way our lives are during the day, we're not going to have that connection during the day a lot of times. So one of the things my wife and I, one of the things that we've done now is we will take 10 minutes before bed. We power down the electronics, we power down the TV, and we look at each other, we face each other, and we talk. Just as you prep for good questions with your kids, like I'm not going to ask her, how was your day? It's just because, again, it's a default question. But I'll ask her like those same questions like, hey, what was your day like today? What were some things that happened that were really, really great for you today? And then she'll tell me those things. And then I'll ask her, well, tell me more about that. And it turns into more of a conversation. And then it turns into a connection. She'll ask me the same questions. But it's so empowering when you don't have the phone, when you don't have the TV on or the iPad or anything like that. You turn and you face each other and you simply talk. And what I can tell you about that 10 minutes is that it's hardly ever 10 minutes. It turns into 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and it turns into a connection, which is great. That's exactly what you want. And that's one way to just keep that flame burning bright, is that communication. The other strategy is the monthly connection. I call this the non-negotiable monthly date night. Again, common sense, not common practice. If you ask a lot of married couples, hey, when was the last time you guys went on a date night? They'll kind of look at each other and they'll be like, oh man, like what year is it?
Exactly.
So
exactly,
it's not something that we normally do. But if you take time literally to sit down and look at your calendars with your spouse and say, okay, what are we doing November, December, and January? let's plan those date nights now. And I call those the non-negotiable date nights. Once you have the day planned, and if you've got small kids, you've got a babysitter planned, booked or whatever, there is no calling in sick. There is no, we had a tough week, we're going to stay in. None of that. You have to go out and you have to interact. The other rule to that is you can't do something like go see a movie or go see a concert because it's not interaction. If you want to do that, that's great, but do that beyond the normal non-negotiable monthly date night. So if you want to go see a movie, that's great.
Right.
Make sure you connect first, though.
Chance to connect. Yeah.
Chance to connect.
No doubt.
And then the third strategy, again, common sense, but not common practice, especially in this day and age with all the distractions we have, which is especially for us men. And I can speak to this because I did it wrong for so long. I still do it wrong from time to time, which is when she speaks, be there. Listen to her. Listen to what she says, how she says it. Look at her in her eyes, her voice inflections. Really connect with her. Women really need to be connected to on an emotional level, not just small talk. Like most men, we're so used to small talk. Really be entrenched in that conversation. Really feel what she's feeling. And that will definitely spark a connection, especially with her. Women need to feel heard. And when they feel heard, they feel loved. And when they feel loved, you'll feel loved.
That's so true. So true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great reminders, great counsel, great advice. So, Larry, I'm just going to use myself as an example. So sometimes we'll go out on this date night, or we actually have date day.
Nice.
So we do, Friday, 12 to 3. Tiger's already in school, so we already have daycare type of deal, and that's a time when we go out and connect, 12 to 3 every Friday. So my question to you is, sometimes making that switch from being totally engaged, totally focused, crushing it at work, and then trying to like immediately jump out and be in personal connection mode with Tatiana. That's tough for me. You know, I've read, I don't remember which book, but it was called The Tetris Effect, right? Where you play Tetris for an extended period of time, and then you go out and you're like putting buildings together and stacking them, you know, because you can't stop playing because you've hit this kind of critical time that you've invested into it to where your brain's totally locked in on Tetris and it can only do Tetris. I think they were talking about how that's tough for people that are like lawyers, where they're in their job, they might be looking for what's wrong all day. Like, where is somebody trying to take advantage and what's wrong? And right. And then they get home and it's like they keep asking themselves those same questions. How do you, I know earlier you were talking about switching your mindset by listening to like a positive podcast. If you feel like you have to go from like work at 11:45 a.m. to date day at 12 p.m., what are some strategies for like instant mindset altering to get into like connection, listening, peace, calm, I'm here for you mode?
That is very, very tough. I can give you a suggestion that I talk about in the book, which is I give 3 different suggestions to get your mind right. We went over one of them. Another way you can do it, and this might work with your wife, is sometimes what you have to do, I quote Tony Robbins, is you have to break the pattern of that thought. You have to break that pattern of that thought. Sometimes how you do it can be very, very extreme, but it does work. And let me give you an example. And I'll give you an example of the date day too. So let's just say you come home from a defeated day at work, right? Very frustrated. You know, the inspirational podcast isn't working, the audiobook's not working, none of that stuff is working. You're just like, man, I just don't have it today. What you can do is you can do something drastic. And what I mean by that is on some days where I feel the most defeated, I will do something the most drastic, which means I'll come in the door, I'll throw one of my kids up over my shoulder, spin them around, give them a high five, dip my wife down, give her a kiss, things like that where, you walk in, your family's like, what the heck's going on? Dad's losing his mind, right? But at the same time, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, wow, this is kind of cheesy and kind of corny, but everyone in the house is laughing. And there's something to be said about momentum. And when everyone in the room is laughing and you've broken that pattern, once you have started, your evening like that or your date day like that, there's something to be said about momentum that breaks that pattern. Once you've broken that pattern, you can then go forward to just a whole new realm of thinking. And if you want to do that for a date day, maybe what you can do is when you see your wife before you hit the town on your date day, dip her down, give her a kiss, maybe even drop on one knee, hold her by the hand and be like, I can't wait for today. And I know today is going to be awesome. And I just want to let you know I really love you, and I know today is just going to be awesome for us. So, I mean, just something that's physically, emotionally, that's going to break that pattern.
Right.
It will work.
Yeah, that's good. I like it. All right, the dip is coming. 11:55 a.m. on Friday, the dip.
Look out.
All right, man, that's good. So Larry, I've got a bunch of questions here for you, but I want to get to this third idea. So I want to give, there's 9. We got to get at least 3 of them, right? So what's the third strategy?
Third strategy is, how do I connect with my kids? And again, it's one of those things that we're not necessarily trained on, and it's not our fault, and we shouldn't feel inferior because we don't have it. But if you can simply do some of those same things with your kids, which is have a daily connection with your kids over communication, have a weekly connection with your kids, and then a yearly, and I'll talk about each one just briefly. So the rules remain the same for your kids. When you have an opportunity to connect with them, and again, I do mine right before they go to bed because it's one-on-one time that I have with each one of them. I don't try to do it in a group because it gets way too crazy. But if you can just simply come prepared to that 10 minutes before bed and ask them some good questions that's going to produce this fantastic conversation, that's what you need to do. And you need to do it 10 minutes every single day. The second thing you can do is my kids and I call this weekly adventures. And it's something very, very simple, but it's something that we do, whether it's a Saturday or a Sunday. We take anywhere from 60 minutes to a few hours, and we do something all together. Get the kids out of the house, give my wife a little bit of time to breathe, but it allows me to connect with my kids. We either do a hike, we go for a bike ride. If the weather's bad, we'll go see a movie. Sometimes we sit at a Starbucks and we do puzzles. I mean, just something simple like that, but it's something that we do together. So it's a weekly thing. It's a weekly adventure. The last thing that I'll touch upon is probably the most impactful thing I have ever done with my kids, and the guys that I've worked with, and I've gotten to see it now for 3 years, and it's so cool, is these guys will send me photos and emails and all this stuff of how they've done this third thing. And this third thing is go on a yearly adventure, a one-on-one trip. And I actually started this when my kids were 6. So the year oldest, I started when they were 6. What I've done over the past couple of years is I take my kids on a one-on-one trip every single year. We plan it together. We do it together. It's anywhere from 48 hours to 3 days. And we just go out and we have an adventure. The first year I took them to Chicago, which Chicago is actually a great place to take a kid, even a small kid. There's so much to do. The second year I took each one of them to Colorado. And we did hikes, and we did horseback riding, and we rode ATVs through the mountains. And what I can tell you about doing that one-on-one trip every single year is it's something that we look forward to every single year. And I didn't get to travel a lot when I was a kid either. So this is like adventurous for me too. And I can tell you that trip will pay dividends in a relationship, because you get to learn and you get to know that kid on a whole new level, and you get to learn what's going on in each year of their life, because every year they change. But it's one year to get away and disconnect from the rest of the world and strictly focus on each other and the adventure at hand. And that has been the most remarkable thing that I've done, and I know a lot of other men have done over the past few years.
Wow. Larry, I have an immediate to-do when we're done here today, and that is to plan my next adventure with Tiger. I realize that's something that's missing for me. I spend a lot of time with Tiger, and we do lots of things, but we haven't had like that. We do like a Papa Tiger day. It's got, we call it, where he and I spend the day together. But I love this idea of like a 2 or 3 day adventure with him, taking him somewhere great, and I can picture it now. So thank you for that. That comment alone will make a big difference in my life and my boy's life. So thank you.
Awesome.
Larry, I got a question for you. So Tiger is a typical dude where you ask him a question and he's got like a 1-word answer. Do you face this, or do you know how other dads have dealt with this? Like, I'll talk to him and say, what are you grateful for at night? And we do this gratitude thing every evening. But he wants to get through that quickly, typically. That's like, he's just like, he wants to wrestle. He's physical. He likes to laugh and joke around and jump around, but he's not very conversational. I mean, his mouth doesn't stop moving. Like, he's always saying something, singing something, but you ask him questions and he's not very vocal. Do you have any strategies, tips for dads that might have children that don't like to articulate? Even when you ask, like, what were the 3 funniest things that happened today? And their answer is, I don't know.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think we all kind of run into that. My kids are right in that mix. I've got a 7-year-old right now. And then, of course, when you have teenagers, that's the other stage that it's tough, to get them to talk, because maybe they don't necessarily, maybe they can talk, but maybe they don't want to talk. So I think a lot of times what you have to do is you have to make sure you're answering the question. For a 6-year-old, I think you have to ask it maybe simple enough. Like, instead of saying, hey, what were the 3 funniest things that happened to you today? Like, what was the coolest thing that happened to you today at school?
Right.
And if they say, oh, it was lunch. Oh, okay. What'd you have for lunch?
Right. Go with it.
You just go with, you ask question on top of answer.
Yeah.
So, even if it sounds corny and cheesy, you're still getting into their world. And if they're like, oh, I had a ham and cheese. Awesome. Is that your favorite sandwich, or what's your favorite sandwich?
Yeah.
And then you can just build upon those questions. So it's literally maybe just asking them a simpler question and then moving forward with different questions from there.
That makes sense. Right. All good stuff. Larry, I literally could pick your brain for hours. I know, man. I can't believe that we're already 39 minutes in. It's totally insane. All right, I got some other questions for you. How do we help our kids know that they're enough?
Oh, that's a great question. So are you talking about little kids?
It could be any kid. Yeah. I mean, for me, selfishly, I would say a 6-year-old, but I know there's people out there who have all different types of age kids. So maybe you could just pick an age and target that, or if there's one answer that applies to all.
Yeah. So we just, that's one of the coolest things about having a podcast is you get to interview different guests and they can give you their professional perspectives on all this stuff, right? So we actually had a professional on our show talk about this. And one of the things that he told us is that kids are they can't tell the difference between abstract and concrete. Their brains don't work that way. So if you get mad at a kid, right, they automatically think, well, dad doesn't like me.
Yes.
Or maybe I'm not loved. Maybe I'm not good enough. I don't know. They don't get the fact that whatever you're mad at them about, it's just that one thing that you're mad at them about.
Yes.
So they have a really hard time with that. So one of the ways you can do that is when you tell your kid, very simply, again, common sense, not common practice, when you tell your kids that you love them, follow it up with 3 words. No matter what. I love you no matter what. And you can, if they ask you, what does no matter what mean? Be like, well, hey, sometimes dad gets angry at some of the decisions you make, right? But always keep in mind, I always love you and you're a good kid. And no matter what you do, no matter what bad decisions you make, I still love you and you're a great person. You're a great kid. That's one way very easily to do that, is to make sure that they know you love them no matter what. The other thing too that he mentioned was in the heat of the moment when you're upset at your kid or if they did something wrong, is to make sure that they really understand it was the decision that they made, the decision, the choice that they made, not them as a person.
Definitely.
It was the decision. So like, for instance, if my son, lies to me, one of the things I want to get across to him is like, I just want to let you know, we don't lie in this family, and I'm disappointed in the decision you made to lie to me. I still love you more than anything and do anything in the world for you. However, I don't like the decision you made to lie to me. So I think when you emphasize that, that's when you can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You can be disciplinary, but you can also reassure your kids that you love them no matter what.
So critical to separate that action from the person.
Right.
You are not a bad person. The action may not have been the best decision to make. Yeah, critical. Oh, and it's so easy. I catch myself, Larry, sometimes saying things, and I'll listen to the words that came out of my mouth, and I meant to say the action was bad, but I could tell that how I phrased it would come across as, you're a bad kid. Because I wasn't careful enough or articulate enough in the way that I said it, because I feel like I'm talking to somebody that, I have to remind myself, and my wife and I talk about this all the time. I'm like, I'm 40, he's 6. I have tons of life experience and context that at 6 you don't have, which is amazing. And I'm reminded of that a lot of times when I'm saying something and he's like, what's that mean? Or what's that word mean? Like half the time he's probably, confused and he's not even telling me, so, or maybe more. But it's critical to be careful and be very intentional with the words we use. All right, some other questions. What 2 experiences do you think, Larry, every child should have? 2 experiences every child should have.
I definitely think 2 experiences, and this one's the first one's kind of general, but I think that I can't recommend that you do a one-on-one getaway with your kids every year. And the reason I say that is because those memories are going to serve them for your entire life and their entire life. They're always going to remember, that trip with dad, or that experience with dad, or dad taught me this while we were on this particular trip, and I'll never forget that. So when you make a deposit like that, where you get away with your kids, that is a deposit you're making for a lifetime. Like, no kidding around, a lifetime. Your kids will forever remember those things. So that's one experience. One caveat to that too, I want to make sure your listeners really get this, is when we think of trips, right? When we think of trips as an adult, we think of something extravagant, right? We think of a getaway, a cruise, or whatever. It doesn't have to, especially for a kid, it doesn't have to be that way. A one-on-one trip doesn't equal extravagance. It could be if you wanted to, that's fine. But just to keep things simple, kids don't measure that stuff in how much it costs or where you went. They measure it in time. So if you can just do camping, your kids are going to forever remember a yearly trip with camping and the lessons you taught them on that trip and the connection you had. I think that that's one. As far as the second one, I think one of the other experiences you can give your kids that will last a lifetime is show them how to be a good man by modeling. And what I mean by that is show them how to be a good husband through your actions, through your purposeful actions. Like, for instance, if I know a lot of us have all the best intentions in the world. Like, for instance, we all know, hey, we love our wives, right? And I love my wife, and my wife knows I love her without even me saying it, right? But do my kids know that? Yeah, I'm sure they do. But when I start to feel that inkling of like, hey, I want to tell my wife out loud that I love her, I want to do that in front of my kids out loud so they can see it and so they can feel it. And if I want to follow that up with like even something kind of, like a hug or giving her a kiss or something, they are going to remember that and they're going to learn through that. One of the things through my own childhood that I remember, I didn't have necessarily the best father, but I did have an amazing grandfather who at the age of 70 years old still loved my grandmother more than anything. And he would always hug her, always kiss her, always tell her how beautiful she was. And I remember seeing that when I was a little kid, and I still remember to this day. And I've taken those lessons and that experience, and I've been able to turn that into the relationship that I have now. So that would be the second one.
That's great. That's awesome. For time purposes here, Larry, I want to dive right into your back row to front row moment. And as you know, one of the underpinnings of our podcast here is to talk about when people stepped up in life, went from being a spectator in the back to a participant up front. And assuming that your children are going to listen to this podcast interview one day and get to know a little bit about Dad, what's one of the more impactful stories that you can share with us about, time in life when you went from watching to doing?
So I'll share a story with you that's pretty tough for me, but it's got a happy ending. As I told you in the beginning of the podcast, I wasn't the best father for the first 5 years of my kid's life. And like I said, it wasn't that I was abusive. It wasn't that I wasn't loving. It's just I was constantly frustrated, and I constantly didn't have a lot of patience, and I was irritable. So I wasn't as purposeful as I would have liked. And I'm sad to admit this, but I'm glad it happened. The night that I came up with the Good Dad Project, I spanked my 2-year-old's butt behind. And, I kind of grew up in an environment where I was hit, and it's one of those things that I never wanted to do. And in the heat of a moment, he was 3 at the time. and we were getting ready to move, and we had all these boxes everywhere, and it was just mad chaos, just boxes everywhere trying to pack. And my 3-year-old, who's 7 now, like literally within 15 minutes had pulled out all kinds of stuff out of every single box that I had just packed. And I was freaking furious. And I went behind him and I spanked him. And I could tell, man, it just crushed him. And I'm sitting there thinking, I was like, crap. I was so pissed. I was like, here I am again, man. I'm just reacting. I'm reacting out of anger because I can't get out of this mentality. I can't get out of this frustration. I can't get myself to have more patience. And I got so pissed at myself that I went in my office and actually kind of got pretty choked up. And I was on Facebook and I was like, something's got to change, has to change. I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to figure it out. And I went on Facebook, and that night I created the Good Dad Project Facebook page. And basically all I did was I was like, I just want something that I can go to every day, that I can go out and search to make myself better. And then I'm going to post it and share it, because the best way to keep myself accountable is to share it. And that's exactly what I did. And I would have never guessed 4 years ago that the Good Dad Project would have turned into a best-selling book, a podcast, a blog, speaking events, coaching. Would have never guessed that in 1,000 years. So I would say that was definitely I wouldn't even say it was my back row moment. It was probably a rock bottom moment. And that was my first step into just being a better version of who I was at the time.
So many of those moments, Larry, for our guests and for my friends, I know came from a moment of darkness in our lives. I'll bet you that there's thousands, millions of dads that can relate to exactly what you just said. And thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that with us. I've had moments exactly what you just described in my life, and I can feel the emotion, man, that you must have been going through, because I've had those moments. I remember my sister, who's an older sister, saying when she had kids, I did not at the point, she was like, I see how people, and so for everybody listening, you have to take this in context, right? Like this is, process this appropriately. She goes, I see how people can hurt their children.
Yeah.
And what she means is like, I could see how somebody gets so frustrated that you're literally teetering on like hurting your children. And I was like, that's a crazy thought. Like, how is that even possible? And I'm a very emotionally stable person, I think. And I will tell you that I get how somebody could be totally worn down, end of the day, lots of things going on, and a 3-year-old is, unpacking all the boxes, and you can just you can flip, you can lose it. And so I think that there's so many people that can relate to that. And I certainly can, that moment, that time. And I think that's so critical for people to have an outlet to be able to talk with others about it, to be able to express their thoughts and feelings. And so thank you for starting the Good Dad Project. Thanks for allowing a space for dads all over the world to be able to connect and share and grow so that we can create a new cycle, something that we haven't learned, but or that maybe we did learn, but we can break the cycle now and start a new generation. So that's awesome, man.
Thank you. And can I make one more point to that?
Please.
I want to stress right here and now to all your listeners, the Good Dad Project and the things that we talk about is exactly what, John, what you were saying, is it is not about perfect parenting at all. Like one of the things that I'm a very transparent person. I will be the first to tell you how many times I screw up in a day. I mean, sometimes it really messes with my head, to be honest with you. So I'm like, man, I speak about this stuff. I blog about this stuff. I podcast about this stuff. Crap, sometimes I still can't do it right.
Right.
But it's one of those things that men don't necessarily have a resource, and we don't have a platform to be like, hey, you know what? You're not the only guy out there that feels like, a moron when it comes to this stuff. We all kind of are morons. No one has it figured out completely. That's the beauty of having a podcast and a blog, is like, hey, let's talk about some of the moronic things that we do and why we do them. And let's teach each other just to kind of be better, because we are all better together. That's really what it's all about.
Right. That's awesome, man. I liked, I think is so great about this and why it ties to my world so appropriately is, and I think I expressed this to you, that my strategy as a dad is to be flexible and engaged.
Yeah.
And, when I liken that to living a front row life is about being present. It's about being in the moment at the show. When you're front row, you're engaged. You're not wishing you were at another concert. I think a lot of people do that. They go to concerts and they are wishing that they were somewhere else or that they're still doing their checklist at home. Very similar to our experiences of life where we can be fully present, totally engaged, but also be flexible. If you go in hoping that the band plays this exact set list, and if they don't do it this exact way, you're going to be highly disappointed. That's not the way to go to a show.
Right.
And I think that with being a parent, it's being flexible, it's being engaged, it's showing up. You've got to show up. And so, man, it's just, it's great to have this conversation. It's great to talk about it. It's great to get all this counsel from you. We've been chatting now for about 55 minutes. I know we're just minutes away here from having to wrap this up. So I've got some kind of final, I don't want to call these rapid fire questions, but these could be shorter answers or whatever or longer, whatever you want to do. But can I throw out a couple more to you here?
Absolutely.
All right. So let's talk about, we gave lots of strategies, lots of ideas today, which is wonderful. You're a wealth of knowledge, Larry, and I'm so glad that our community now has a resource and access to you. What's one thing that you might suggest that the dads listening to this podcast today, and moms too, you could see how a lot of this applies to both, but what's one thing that parents can do in the next 24 hours to live a front row life with their children? And by that, I mean, be engaged, be present, be there, right? What's something they can do?
I think one of the things you can do is just make an immediate plan. And it would take you no more than 2 minutes to write it down. Like, for instance, if you want to connect with your kids, just right now, as you're listening to this show, right here, right now, literally write down 2 questions that you would ask that you normally wouldn't ask your kids. Write down 2 questions that you wouldn't ask your wife, but you're going to ask her tonight to have that engaged conversation. That's literally 2 right there for you. And as far as patience goes, learn how to ask yourself more empowering questions, not defeated mind questions.
Yeah, that's great. Power of questions. That's the takeaway. I love it.
Yes.
All right. Here's some fun ones. What adventure are you most looking forward to taking with your kids in the next year or 2?
My kids really want to go to 2 different places. They want to do Washington, D.C. because they want to just see what that's all about, the history, and they want to go see Yellowstone National Park.
Very cool. Have you been to Yellowstone?
I have not, but I like I said, the majority of the places we go, I've never been.
That's cool. You're going to have a blast there. Well, both are wonderful. Maybe we should coordinate, Larry. Let's get the families together. When you think of a dad who is really doing it right, who comes to mind? And what's the first thing that comes to mind with that dad?
So like an actual dad?
Yeah, like one person specifically that you think is like your hero, mentor, or just somebody that you think is really doing an awesome job as a dad.
I would say he's no longer with us, but my grandfather is the first one that comes to mind. And here's what I mean by that. He was a great role model for loving my grandmother. He's very outspoken about it and through his actions and his words. The other thing is he was very affectionate with me growing up. He was always, he'd give me a hug, and he always told me, affirmations, to let me know that he was always like in my corner. The other thing too is he also had tough love. So when I screwed up, he let me know. Like, there was that line of respect there. And what I mean by that is he was very good at telling me, like, the decision you made was not a good one. You're still a good kid, but that decision was not a good one. Here's why. And what did you learn from it? So he was also good at asking me questions of, why I made a decision I did and what I took from it.
That's great. If you had to pick one person to switch brains with for a day, who would it be and why?
Man, these are crazy questions, Jon.
It's a mental workout here on the Front Row Factor podcast.
Oh my gosh. Let me think here. Yeah, the first person that comes to mind, I ironically, my kids and I just watched Dragon, the Bruce Lee story,
Yeah.
the one that came out like 20 something years ago. I would say if I was ever able to switch brains with someone, I would just want to know the thought processes that Bruce Lee used to make his life so extraordinary.
Oh, that's great. I love that answer. I had a real passion for martial arts when I was a kid.
Nice.
And huge Bruce Lee fan, and nobody's ever said that. So awesome. There's another area that we're connected right there. Growing up, do you remember having a passion for something that you wanted to be or do when you were a little kid, let's say, 5 to 10?
My passion was I wanted to. I remember always looking up to, just as any other kid, superheroes. I remember especially Superman. He was, I would say that was one thing I always aspired to, but it wasn't necessarily the fact that he wore a cape and he could fly and all that. It was the fact that he could help people. And I remember as a kid, even like as a little kid, I was always empathetic. I was a very empathetic kid, almost to a detriment. Where I always wanted to help people, even if it sacrificed a lot of myself. Through the years, I've learned the balance in that. But I would say I've always had a passion for helping people. And at least that's what I get to live out now.
That's awesome. You're doing it, man. You're doing it. You've helped me today, and I know many of our listeners, so thank you for that. What is something fun that you've collected in your lifetime?
Kind of a Star Wars guy.
Nice.
So I have like all kinds of Star Wars memorabilia, and I'm like geeking out over this next movie coming out.
I was just reading about some museum that just opened up where they have like a ton of the Star Wars collectibles. Did you hear about this?
Yeah, it's my basement.
Yeah, that's cool. You'd also like the episode I did with that. Maybe you heard it already with Dan Caldwell, the founder of Tap Out. He's a big Star Wars collector.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he likes that. So that's awesome. He said one of his dream items is he wants to get one of the, how do you call it, a clapper? That when they cut the scenes and they,
oh, yeah,
whatever that thing is called. I don't know.
Yeah.
But he wanted to get one of the originals. That was interesting. All right, so we're out of time. So here's the final question. If you could be front row at any event, anywhere in the world, who would you want to see? And bonus, where would you want to see them?
So I'm actually going to live that dream out here in 2 weeks.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
I don't know if you know who Mark Devine is. He is a New York Times bestselling author and a commander in the Navy SEALs, and he owns a company called SEAL Fit, and he also owns the Unbeatable Mind workshop. And I've always been a huge fan of Mark. I read his book Unbeatable Mind. I guess it was about a year and a half ago before we even started the podcast. And when I started my podcast, he was like literally on my bucket list for having on our show. And lo and behold, he came on our show. And then I was on his podcast just a couple weeks ago, and he invited myself and my wife out to his Unbeatable Mind retreat that he has in San Diego. He only allows 100 people in it. And I'm proud to say that we are going to be front row in that workshop. And he's even talking about the two of us doing a book together next year.
Oh, that's great, man. Proximity is power, as
yes.
Our mentor, Tony Robbins, has said. Wonderful. That's great. Well, enjoy, and I look forward to hearing some updates from that. So, Larry, I'm intrigued at a level deeper than when we started here for sure about your mission, your project, and you as a human being. Where can people find more Larry, more Good Dad Project? Tell us, give us 2 or 3 places where people can go find you.
Any social media platform you can find me at Good Dad Project. It's usually my handle everywhere on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can also, obviously, our website is the best place to find us, which is gooddadproject.com. We've got tons of free resources there. We have our podcast there. You can also find us on iTunes, our podcast there, Stitcher Radio, our podcast there. You can actually find the book on Amazon. Amazon has the exclusive rights to it, I believe, for like the next 60 days. And then you'll be able to find it on Google Play and iTunes. But for now, you can go to Amazon, just type in Dad's Edge. My book is the first one that pops up. So that's where you can find all those resources. But by all means, I would tell your listeners, please connect. I've had the blessing of connecting with so many people, especially since the book launched. And it has been a true blessing. Even if you want to connect with me personally on Facebook, it's just Facebook, Larry Hagner. I think I'm one of like 3 Larry Hagners, but I've got the Good Dad Project logo in the background as my cover picture.
That's awesome. Well, I look forward to building our relationship, Larry, in the months and years ahead. I'm grateful to have somebody like you influencing my world. I know that my children are going to have a better experience in life as a result of this connection. So, ladies and gentlemen, take some action here. Take the tips, implement them today. Get the date day going, the date night. Ask some really quality questions. And focus on being the type of parent that at the end of your life, you'll be really proud that you were intentional about. So thank you, Larry. I want to say also this to you in front of everybody here today. Thanks for making the world a better place. By nurturing our children in a very intentional way, we will certainly have a massive impact that will just ripple on and on. And I always say to people at the end of our podcast shows, and I really mean this, thanks for making a world that my children will grow up in. I mean, in many ways, we're all connected, and you're helping shape a world that my boys are growing up in. So on the most, on the deepest level possible, I'm grateful for you. I feel like you're a brother. I feel like we're in this together. You're a teammate. And I'm just so grateful that you've chosen to invest your time and your energy in a project that brings so much, fulfillment to not only the dads, and they can enjoy the process as you were talking about, but also to their children, and that they can experience the best versions of their dad. So thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thanks for being generous with your time today. And to everybody listening, check back in a couple of days. We'll be back with Larry for our encore episode. Until next time, until our next chat, thanks, Larry. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks again, man.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening to that interview with Larry Hagner of the Good Dad Project. And also, as you know, he's the author of The Dad's Edge. Make sure you get to Amazon and pick up a copy of that today. You'll be happy that you did. If you're a dad, buy it for yourself. And if you're not a dad, buy it for a dad you care about and love. I will tell you, we have a great encore episode with Larry in just a couple of days, so make sure to check back for the questions that are created by you, the community, that we get to ask to Larry. And if you don't know what we're talking about there, then just make sure you become part of the Front Row Facebook community. You can go to frontrowfriends.com right now, join the community, and when I have a guest on the show, I'll post in there who we're interviewing, and you can tell me what questions you'd like to ask. And so that's a way for you to get immediately involved. I also want to say thanks to you for supporting the show. One of the best ways to support the show is just to share it and also to give it a rating and a review. If you're an iTunes listener, just click right on the screen on your phone, on my face, on the Front Row Factor icon, and that will pop up the show notes. And right in there, you can see it says subscribe, rate, and review. Right there is a chance for you to click and just write a quick review. We appreciate that so much. It helps our rankings, which means more people can find us. Simple as that. Also, want to let you know, if you're not already getting our 4 Minute in the Front Row weekly email, check out frontrowfactor.com and you can sign up there, where each week I share some quick strategies on how to live a more fulfilling life in the front row. These are books I'm reading, documentaries I've seen, strategies I've learned that I'm just passing along to you. A little dose of good stuff every Friday. And if you have questions about the Front Row Foundation, the charity that we support, check out frontrowfoundation.org and join the conversation. So until next time, keep living your life in the front row.
That's all for this episode of the Front Row Factor. To discover more simple and effective ways to lead a fearless front row life, please visit frontrowfactor.com and subscribe to Jon's 4 Minutes in the Front Row, where he shares quick stories from real life experiences. Thanks again for joining us today. We hope our show inspires you to live big, give big, and experience life to the fullest. See you next time on the Front Row Factor.